Tish B'Av. 2 temples destroyed nearly 700 years apart. The last days are past days. Hello, everyone. My name is Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, which is my email address, or in the comments below if you like. Now, and if you like this video, share, subscribe, or whatever YouTube might recommend it on to somebody else. But, I don't know if that's happening or not at all. Well, I've had to boost my camera brightness a little bit. It's quite dreary, and try to get a little bit of extra light. It's just one of those slightly overcast days. I usually rely on a bit of natural light coming in from that side. So there we go. It's why the white balance changes from week to week. It's just trying to get things about right without a studio. Hey, that doesn't really matter though. We're going to be looking at a day that should be included in the church calendar. What is the church calendar? Well, the traditional churches, the Catholic, Orthodox, the Protestant churches, the more established ones, have a kind of a preaching calendar that rolls over a period of about 2 to 3 years, depending, I think it's about 3 years, wherein the minister oftentimes preaches against that to be sure that all the primary doctrines are covered. And over that period of time, and then they're kind of cycled. It doesn't mean the same message, but it just kind of rolling conversations along with scripture readings and so on. I keep my eye on the church calendar. Certainly don't want to miss, and you wouldn't miss Christmas, Easter, Pentecost. You probably some of those other days, Ascension Sunday and so on, so that we're kind of talking about it when everybody else is sort of talking about it. There is a day, however, that needs to be added to the church calendar, in my opinion, and that's the day that marks the last of the last days, when the last days were completely finished, because we know that day. We know approximately that time period, and so that should be in the church calendar as well. And that day is Tish B'Av 70. Not 1970, 70. And that's when the old covenant system was finished, when the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth came into its full place. It is when the division between God's old covenant people and the nations was completely broken down, as Ephesians said it would. It was the time when animal sacrifices ceased, and when the full exposure of what God had planned from the very beginning, that is the new covenant, new creation, was in play. And so we know when that date was. And so we really should have this as a celebration. Now, even if you would say that prophecy is still ongoing, now my position there is that prophecy is fulfilled, but even if you'd say it's still ongoing, we should still have Tish B'Av in our calendar, because it's very, very important, biblically, really important. Well, what is Tish B'Av? First of all, when is Tish B'Av, or when was it this year? Because it varies. The Jewish calendar and the Western calendars are a little bit out of sync, and same as the Islamic calendar, so and others as well. Well, we'll just show you the date this year, because this is 2024. So let me just pop this up here on this one and come down. You probably can't see this that clearly. This is August. I'll expand it out in a moment. This is from the Hebrew calendar online. This is August 2024, and you'll notice down here, can you see my mouse? Maybe on the 13th, so the 12th is the eve. Remember, the day mark is not midnight, but it's sundown, so the Hebrew calendar. And so you'll notice that it is from the 12th to the 13th. So we would say the 13th is the day, I guess, the way that we would sort of think about it. Just expanding this out, you can see 13th of August, 2024. So that is Tish B'Av. Well, what happens specifically on Tish B'Av? Why is it important? Now, Jews hold this important for a lot of days. There are 2, however, that I would say there'd be no dispute about. There are some others that are quite interesting and they're worth reading about and understanding. But the 2 big ones we are going to address today. The first temple was destroyed in about 596, 597 BC. It's a bit of a question about when that was. And that was destroyed by the Chaldeans, who were sent by God under Nebuchadnezzar to bring judgment against Israel. And that temple fell on Tish B'Av. Now, it wasn't a one-day event sort of thing. The temple was huge. It took time for it to take place. But the marker day of that was Tish B'Av, the 9th of the month of Av. And so that was really important. Now, almost 600 years later, in AD 70, the second temple fell. God didn't send the Chaldeans at the time, the Babylonians, they were long gone. He sent the Romans, as had been promised, to bring judgment again against Israel for very similar reasons. And that temple was destroyed also on the same day. That is just amazing that the 600 year time period, and again, those dates there's a bit of dispute around the dates, nothing about AD 70, but about the earlier date. But this approximately 600 year time period, a bit less, is just really fascinating that on the same day, twice, or on the same day, two temples were destroyed. Wow, I think God is saying something. Now, we do know that there is language used for the destruction of the first temple that is also used for the destruction of the second temple in the second city, but oftentimes people think that the New Testament prophecies are still in our future, and they see language like the Lord coming in the clouds, or the dead being devoured by birds, or so on and so forth, and they say, oh, this terrible time, it's still coming on the planet. They'll take the prophecies of the book of Revelation and make them future, and it's pretty grim if you do that. However, the smart thing to do is to say, where was this language used and what did it refer to if it was used in the past? Now, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, and certainly the writer of the book of Revelation referred extensively to the Old Testament promises, the Old Testament covenants, the Old Testament blessings and curses, the Old Testament prophecies in understanding what we would call New Testament prophecy. Paul said that's all he preached from. All his end time stuff came from the prophets. Peter makes a very similar comment. The Lord Jesus, when he talks about the judgments to come that were to come, based on the people who were there at his time, in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, also Luke 17 for to a different audience, builds his entire prophetic body on the Old Testament prophecies. He either quotes them or he uses the same language. We kind of don't get that. We don't make that. It doesn't connect with us. Now, we're going to use a couple of examples today. When I started this study, I thought, okay, let me just get my notes out, my Zettelkasten notes and other things, and just grab a few examples. And I realized this is just huge. I've got such a huge library of information to go through. I just no way that I can do this or even do it half justice. It's like it'd have to be a series here. So I decided in the last couple of days that that'll be my probably third book. I'm working on one, I'm just revising it. I'm about to start a second one, and probably my third one will be this study. And what the study would be is a look at specifically the language and the prophecies that dealt with the first Tish B'Av, and then see how they're reused to refer to the second. And that will help us to understand that those end time prophecies, end time curses, blessings, and so on, are not global, worldwide events that are in our future. They could only have referred to a city that is in our past, only. And that really is a great study. Now let's come and have a look at a couple of examples. I'll just cherry pick some. I have just cherry picked some. You can do this study yourself. This isn't that hard to do. You just need to be committed to do it and take the time. So here is our Tish B'Av slide. Here's something we have seen, and we know one part of this. We know the bottom, when the bottom reference. By the way, I screenshotted these. I didn't drop the text in or anything because of the time it would take to do that. And I've had a really busy time, so I've just done screenshots. I need to do a better job going forward here. We know from Matthew 21, when the Lord cleansed the temple, he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." Now, the Lord Jesus was talking about the temple that was standing at the time in his day. He referred to this in this way, the temple which was destroyed on Tish B'Av 2, that is AD 70. But look where it comes from. Jeremiah says the same thing about the first temple, the destruction of Solomon's temple. And, we've got an alarm going on, just turned it off now. Said the same thing about the destruction of Solomon's temple. He says, "Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord." So this is very interesting. What was said about the first Tish B'Av, the Lord is now saying about the second Tish B'Av. Let's go on to another slide here. When the Lord is, we'll start at the bottom. Oh, by the way, if you see the red arrow refers to something, a prophecy or a statement given about the first Tish B'Av, the one that happened 600 years before. And we're just rounding off the dates, as I have said. So Jeremiah 11:16 is a a theme, a motif, if you will, that appears regularly in the prophets about Old Covenant Israel. And Jeremiah is about to prophesy. Most of Jeremiah's immediate prophecy have to do with the fall of the temple that was in his day, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. It's all surrounding that. Both of these prophets existed, and others, in a time when the temple was about to fall. The nation was about to be judged. So they're just looking at that next Tish B'Av. They didn't know the date. We do going back, of course. They didn't know the date. God did. All right. Now, Jeremiah uses a recurring theme when he says, "The Lord once called you a green olive tree, beautiful with good fruit, but with a roar of great tempest, he will set fire to it, and its branches will be consumed." Now, this is what, and you find the same thing a couple of times, I think, in Jeremiah, and about 3 times in Ezekiel. So you can look these up. Just look at the phrase green tree. It's fascinating. Now, when the Lord is being led away to be crucified in Luke 23, there's a very interesting statement. The women are mourning, and he says to pray for yourselves and for your children. He says, "For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" What was the Lord saying? At the time when the Lord Jesus was in his earthly ministry, Israel was a green tree. It was being blessed. You had his miracles, you had John the Baptist ministry, you had the Lord's miracles, you had the great things happening with the apostles that were to come. You had this massive, wonderful, you could call it a revival. But that was going to end. Within 40 years, God had brought judgment, and the tree was dry. So what happens with the green tree? It's hard to burn. What happens with the dry tree? It burns. And that's really fascinating. So this language that the Lord uses about the city of Jerusalem, this is an end time statement that he's making here, was used by Jeremiah, was used by Ezekiel, referring to the city that was sacked and destroyed and the temple that was sacked and destroyed in their day. It's the reuse of this language. Fascinating, fascinating. Let's go and have a look at a couple of other examples here. And so that was Jeremiah 11:16. Now, you notice that the target of God's judgment, the locus of it, was the temple, and what surrounded the temple, the city, that was Jerusalem. Now, listen to Jeremiah 21:10, talking about the judgment to come on Jerusalem in his day. Jeremiah was alive when it happened, and he knew when it was taking place. Ezekiel was alive when it happened. They knew when it was taking place. Ezekiel was in Babylon. Jeremiah was away on the way. I think it was Egypt at the time. Wasn't in the city. God preserved both of them. Listen to Jeremiah 21:10. "For I have set my face against this city for harm and not for good, declares the Lord. It shall be given into the hand of the king of Babylon. He shall burn it with fire." Now look at Jeremiah 32:29. "For the Chaldeans who are fighting against this city shall come and set this city on fire and burn it with the houses on whose roofs offerings have been made to Baal and drink offerings have been poured out to other gods to provoke me to anger." Same judgment, same prophecy. He's talking about what he's going to do to the city. Let's go on here. In Jeremiah 23:31, now this is, the first one was 21. So between these two, and again, I've just read pretty much the whole book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, just in getting almost the whole book's getting an overview for this topic here. But listen to what it says here in Jeremiah 32:31. Did I say between these two? Yes. "This city has aroused my anger and wrath from the day it was built to this day, so that I will remove it from my sight." Actually, that prophecy is after the previous one. So listen to what he says. "This city has aroused my anger and my wrath from the day it was built to this day, so that I will remove it from my sight." Now, what is important here is that this is covenantal language. God is not obliterating Jerusalem so that it no longer exists and he can't see it, but he's taking away its place, its status, because the city was rebuilt after this, we know. And the Lord said this judgment would only last for 70 years. This is covenantal language going on here. So, but you can see here that the city has vexed the Lord the whole time. And that's a really, really interesting statement that is that Jeremiah makes here. Now, what's our next slide say? Ezekiel, and again, both Jeremiah and Ezekiel prophesied significant amount of their prophecy had to do with the impending immediate Tish B'Av, the impending just coming immediate judgment against Judea and against Jerusalem and against the temple, both of them. Now, God knew what was coming. Maybe when they were prophesying, they didn't have a good picture of this, but the Lord knew. And the Lord's inspiring them and giving them words. They are his shaliach, right? They're speaking as the man himself. Now, here is Ezekiel 5:2. A third part you shall burn in the fire in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are completed. And a third part you shall take and strike with the sword all around the city. And a third part you shall scatter to the wind. And I will unsheath the sword after them. So now you have the fire being burned, the city being burned with fire, God bringing judgment. And you see this same theme now appearing many times in the New Testament. You can find those passages. You've read them. I'll give you one to look at here. Matthew 22:7. The king was angry, sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. This is from one of the Lord's parables, one of his ongoing stories. And so you see that the city, the place that's going to be judged, is the same city in the New Testament time, looking forward, that Isaiah and Jeremiah, Isaiah too, but Jeremiah and Ezekiel prophesied about then. Really, really interesting. Now, there are other themes I'm not going to get to today. The idea is, one of the themes is that of siege warfare. When the first Tish B'Av happened, the Bible says that the Babylonians would set up a siege against the city. In other words, they'd blockade the city, and they would wait till it fell. They would bombard it from the walls and so on until they broke through. Siege warfare. You'll also notice in Jesus' teaching and prophecy about the upcoming judgment that is really local. It's not global. It's not about the end of the world. He talks about a siege wall that would be built then in his day, looking forward to the next Tish B'Av. Okay, so Jeremiah and Ezekiel prophesied about a Tish B'Av to come. Did they know the date? No, they probably didn't know the date. The Lord did. The Lord Jesus, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, the Apostle John, the New Testament writers prophesied about an event, a judgment that would come also, the second Tish B'Av, the last of the last days. The Bible does not look back. There's no scripture that looks back on the fall of Jerusalem. That's really interesting, because all scripture was written before. I hold to that view, that all scripture was written before the fall of Jerusalem. And so wouldn't it be great? You know, it was God's choice, really, to have written scripture afterwards and looked back. A lot of times people say, well, you know, the book of the Gospels were put together after the fall of the book of Revelation or whatever. And they never mention the single greatest event to ever happen to Judaism, which is, or to Old Testament, we call it Judaism today, but the Old Testament system, the Old Covenant system, the destruction of the temple. They never mention it. Revelation doesn't look back and say, you know, wow, that was a terrible thing that happened. They all sort of look forward. Well, we have this pattern here from Scripture. We know what the Old Testament prophets talked about and how they talked about the impending judgment against Jerusalem, that first Tish B'Av. We can see that same language being recycled and being reused about the one to come that is now in our past. So let's go back and have a look at a couple of others. But I need to do one more thing. What is my time like? Oh, we'll just pip the 20 minutes today, which is okay. And because it's a lot of material. By the way, this could go on for 20 days. So again, there's a lot of material here. Now, you'll also notice that there is other language going on here. When Jeremiah prophesied about the destruction of Jerusalem, the first Tish B'Av, he said this: behold, he comes up like clouds, his chariots like the whirlwind, his horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. Now, both Jeremiah prophesied this way. Ezekiel calls this the day of the Lord. Really interesting. We're not even going to touch the day of the Lord today in this conversation, except to, not going to give it a lot of time. The coming in the clouds. Remember what the New Testament says about the Lord's judgment coming in the clouds? It's using the same language that was used in the Old Testament. The judgment of coming in the clouds in the New Testament is not a global, earth-destroying, earth-burning judgment that the whole planet will see. No, it is highly localized. It was highly localized on just this one area so that the new covenant could have full predominance, as we've talked about in the past. And you'll notice that this coming in the clouds language really describes who the Lord is. There are some references here that are not specifically about this, that just in the Old Testament, that just remind us here. In Psalm 18, after David was rescued, he talked about his rescue, and he says, he, that is the Lord, rode on a cherub and flew. He came swiftly on the wings of the wind. Isn't that wonderful language? Psalm 104, 2-4. Oh man, this psalm is the basis for a lot in the book of Hebrews. It is a wonderful, wonderful psalm. Wow. Psalm 104, 2-4. Covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. Okay? And even back earlier in Deuteronomy chapter 33, there's none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help, through the skies in his majesty. And so that's really, really fascinating. I've just cherry-picked a few references to this. Let me just nail this here for you very, very quickly. History records 2 Tish B'Avs, that is, twice, well, many Tish B'Avs every year, but 2 significant events that occur on Tish B'Av. The first event was, the big one, was the fall of the temple in about 600 years before, well, let's say in the 500s, before Christ, the fall of the temple. It was done at the hands of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, led by Nebuchadnezzar. God appointed Nebuchadnezzar. He said, I'm putting a sword in Nebuchadnezzar's hand, and he equipped the Chaldeans to bring judgment because the nation had rebelled against him. When this took place, or as this was going to take place, prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others talked about how this would happen, or talked about what would take place. They talked about the heavens and the earth changing, cosmic language. They talked about it being the day of the Lord. They talked about it, the scavenger animals eating the carcasses of the fallen, which we didn't talk about here. They talked about the Lord coming in the clouds. They talked about all of those sort of things that again are used in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament, by the way. But particularly, we're most familiar with the New Testament prophecies here. And again, it's used in the New Testament, or after the temple is rebuilt, I guess you could say it like that, to refer to yet another judgment. And the same language is used again. These elements coming in the clouds, the day of the Lord, and so on and so forth, are not to be construed as global planet-killing future events, because that's not how the language was ever used. That was not the intent. These events, these things, refer specifically to what God did at the last of the last days. So back to my initial comment here, we need to add an extra day to the church calendar, and that is Tish B'Av. We've already got the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ. We've got Passover or Easter, whatever you want to call it. We've got Pentecost. We need to add this one, which is the last day, the last of the last days, the time when all prophecy was fulfilled. There you go. My name is Persohn. I'm glad that you visited with me today. Come back again next week.